Well, hello everybody. It's lovely to see you all. And a special welcome, of course, to our speaker, Professor Guillem Feixas from University of Barcelona. It must be 1985, was it? Guillem, the Cambridge conference, when we met first. And since then, I must have been over to teach on your course about how many times? 10 or 12 times, perhaps?
Yeah.
Guillem runs a course in Barcelona, social and cognitive therapy, and shares my interest in combining working with families, particularly, and personal construct theory, and has written some very interesting papers on that topic. And you and Lewis as well, but also from Barcelona, different university. You run these courses together, don't you? And I'm going to be coming over in April. And I think Lewis said a few minutes ago that you have 150 people in the course. I mean, in the two courses combined. Which is a very impressive number of people to be getting some sense into their heads.
It's about half that now. It's because of different reasons.
Oh, the COVID and things. Yeah. But it's because still a very healthy number of people.
Yeah.
One of Guillem's big contributions is the area of implicative dilemmas, which many of you, I'm sure, know about. Very much impressed me when he was able to show that the number of dilemmas as collected on a repertory grid with special measures to derive a measure of the number of dilemmas in the person's construing correlates with general psychological difficulties, levels of psychological difficulty. Am I right, Guillem, to say that? As well as specifically showing in various different types of psychological difficulties, such as eating disorders and fibromyalgia and depression. And you've done many research projects taking that forward, haven't you? Well, I'll stop rabbiting on and hand over to Guillem. So, welcome.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you to all the organizers of this Constructivist Meetup series. I think it's a very interesting initiative, a very good thing, one of the good things coming out from the pandemic. I don't know we would have thought of it if not, but it's here and we can enjoy it, I hope. Today I will focus on a specific technological contribution, I hope, to the field. But I wanted to put a little bit of context along the lines that Harry suggested, to see that it's not technology per se, but technology directed to ease the use of the exploration of personal constructs, or to at least give a different way to do the same things that we have been doing for decades. Maybe for being able to engage people who, in terms of clients or patients, are more comfortable in a technological meadow, or also for clinicians who do not have the skills to administer a repertory grid and can be assisted by a technological device to do that. Okay, so let me share my screen and I will try to make myself clear. First of all, I want to say that everything that you will be seeing here today, it's part of a teamwork that I am honored to lead at the University of Barcelona with several postgraduates like Alejandro and Miquel, and also some PhD students. So this is a collective type of venture, and I want to make clear that we have a research group which is termed Intervention in Clinical and Health Psychology, and this group you can find all our publications and the members. You can find it in this address here, which is not very long. So maybe if you want to, maybe later I can put it into the chat if you want. Okay, so the focus, the theoretical focus of the group is on the idea of identity and the self, and this is maybe we became aware of that lately in the last 5 or 6 years. In fact, it happened when we decided to submit a proposal to the European Union, which has been turned down 5 times. And we are still presenting it. And we were trying to find a subject which was relevant in different areas. And we found that self-identity is really what matters to us. And we are not talking at some point, we are not talking of personal construct theory directly, but subordinated to the idea of studying self and identity. Because talking about self and identity is finding a common language with many people who is, I believe, close to our core interest as a group. I know that the PCP group is a very loose and diverse and varied group, but I think that we are all concerned with the idea of self and how self changes. And Kelly was not very explicit about self and identity, but at the center of his theory, at the center of the personal construct system, there are the core constructs. And he just mentioned in 1 or 2 places that the identity are the core process, is the core construct. So I think that even he was not emphasizing that. I think that now we can revitalize and revisit personal construct theory from the viewpoint as a very useful theoretical and technical and methodological framework for the study of self-identity and the change processes involved in identity. To that respect, and thanking to the mention that Harry made to my common interest with him, with families also do have some kind of identity. It might be more loose or more tight, but they do have a sense of who we are as a family. So, and of course, cultures. I mean, whether this is in an area or even in a nation, we can have a nation, we can have a self of identity as Catalans or North Ireland's or British or whatever. I mean, identity is in many places. We were talking about gender issues here. I think it's something that it's gaining recognition, but you cannot find it as a topic in many training courses. So I think that if you look at the slide and use, I think it's clear that identity is important, that it implies both differentiation and assimilation to others, and the need for continuity is a psychological need that needs to be honored and respected. And I think that we, as personal construct practitioners, we have been doing that for decades. And Kelly's approach was consistent with that respect for the psychological need for continuity. In fact, that's the function of the core construct, isn't it? So Well, let's see how I make it to advance now. Yeah, let's have a look at the literature. This is Scopus, which is my preferred search engine, and you can see that well, in 1976 there were only a few entries for self-identity, and if you look at 2021, it's about 400 times the number of publications that we had in several decades ago. And if you look at the number of 2021, we must realize that it's not finished and that search engines have a backlog. So this, if we look at this at the 2021 data in 1 year from now, it will be much higher, just because of procedures of counting for it. So I think this is an important topic. And the instrument I'm going to present today, sometimes I introduce it as a way to explore fully self-identity.
Excuse me, Guillem, maybe you would like to maximize the slides?
No, I'm pleased
okay.
like this. Yes, if you can see it, I'm pleased like this because I can put the images on my left, and it works well for me. If it is not a problem for you all,
no,
thank
fine.
you for the suggestion. So it's curious. I would like you to read. I give you a couple of minutes to read this beginning of a paper by this man called Smith Baker. I assume he's a man. Actually, this is a quote of 2 centuries ago, of the 19th century. I mean, I found it casually today, and I thought, I mean, it's in Psychological Review in 1897, and I think he's pointing to what we see every day in our clinical practice and also in health psychology, that people it's the difficulty of people for change has to do for the need of continuity. And I think this Dr. Smith Baker was aware of that in some ways. And I think that this line of research was only taken seriously by Kelly. Of course, I don't assume that Kelly had written or not this piece, but I find it completely compatible. Okay, what is our instrument? Well, this is the instrument that we use, the repertory grid in its interpersonal form. So it's the most important part, and why I'm showing this too, is that it is empty. This is the more important of it. So we must co-construct it with the person that we want to assess. And this is the more revolutionary part of the repertory grid. I think that it's not something given, as the thousands of instruments that we have produced and we have used, including myself, of course, in our research. But this is one of the instruments. I don't know if one of the first instruments, there are many others now, that needs a co-construction process. And I think that this paper and pencil procedure that we have been using for decades had provided us with many gains, with many contributions. Here in the columns, we always put people, and in the rows, in the lines, we put the 2 poles of the constructs, and we use usually a 7-scale Likert type scale. Okay, I think that everybody will be familiar with that, and I will show through a case example one of the ideas that we try to contribute to the community, and then we will see how we can arrive to that using the instrument I'm presenting. Okay, Elena, she's 49-year-old, married, it's a very low educational level. Many people say that she was cleaning houses, basically. And many people say that for doing a grid, you need a certain intellectual level or something like that. I don't believe. I think you need an intellectual level to understand some questionnaires. But the grid is using the words of the people. So yeah, she worked as a care for older people and sometimes cleaning houses. She had been unemployed, and she was not foreseeing returning to work because 2 years ago she had an onset of physical pains, which was diagnosed as fibromyalgia, and she had to quit her job. Is living from her husband's pension, which is not very high, and she had been in depression for several years now. And in Spain, when someone is treated for depression, they give them pills. And if pills do not work, they change to another pills. If they do not work, they change to another one. And there are several. So that it takes a while until someone thinks, oh, maybe psychotherapy could be of use. And this is what happened with her. Okay, this is her grid. I mean, we can see some of the content of his constructs. It's interesting that he just, let me highlight that she sees herself as very generous, and the ideal self, which we always put in the last column, is also being very, very generous. But and also she sees herself as a slacker at the moment because her pain doesn't allow her to work. But see how she's criticizing herself as a slacker, and the ideal self is being a hard worker, similar for acting and active and uncaring. So we can see some of her themes here and how unhappy she is and how feeble or weak she feels. So she's crumbling and she would like to be very strong if we look at the ideal self, and we can see the position of other people here. I assume that everybody understands this quite easily. If anybody needs any further, I think that I'm happy to clarify, but I'm sure you understand this very quickly. And you have practiced yourself doing that. Okay, more or less. This is just to see what type of grid we are working with. And for this and studying identity, we look for self-congruency and self-ideal discrepancy. So playing with these two elements, self-now or ideal self, those constructs which are close in the ratings are termed congruent, and those which are different, for example, the one on hardworking or slacker, in which there was a big difference between self and ideal self, that would be a discrepant construct. We use that term, which you might not like, maybe. I don't know how, or you do. I don't know how appropriate it is, but we use this term. We use discrepant when self and ideal are far away. Okay, and we use congruent. For example, she sees herself as generous, and her ideal self is generous as well. So this is congruence. Okay, we can include in the grid other elements such I before the crisis, self when drunk, or whatever related to the problem that the person brings to the consultation or therapy room. Okay, so here we have a list of discrepant constructs for Elena. Stubborn, slacker, uncaring, unhappy, crumbles. And this is reflecting for us something very important, is why does Elena need to change? She needs to change in across those dimensions, okay? But also, and this is what not usually some analysis of psychological profiles look at, is what is the areas of congruence? So in which areas she's happy with herself? And in that respect, I think that personal construct theory is also compatible with some positive psychology developments, because we don't only look at what doesn't work, but Kelly wrote about the optimal function. In the case of Elena, she had an optimal functioning in terms of being generous, humane, good person, good with money, not stingy, and getting emotions out, which is something that she developed across time. And here, these constructs do not reflect the need for change, but rather the need for continuity, and express the personal coherence of Elena. So we have these two types of things, and this is the tension in which identity encounters at the moment. And we try to look at the relationships between all the congruent and all the discrepant constructs, looking at those associations in terms of Pearson correlation of the data matrix, in which a desired change, for example, becoming a strong, is associated with an undesired change, for example, for her to become selfish. Okay, so this is the notion that Harry was mentioning before of implicative dilemma. The notion was inspired to me listening to David Winter in one of his presentations, I think in an SPR Congress in Lyon, 1991. And I keep thinking about it and ended up in a way to operationalize that into the repertory grid. And we operationalize it in this way, which is not perfect, but it's a way to do it. And it's the way that we used in our research. So from a clinical point of view, if we want to help Elena to become stronger, we have to check whether for her becoming a stronger makes her feel more selfish. As long as this verifies in an experiential context, not just in an intellectual grid analytical context, then if that happens, then the supposed implicative dilemma can be confirmed in some way, preliminarily confirmed, and then we can work with it therapeutically so that she can find a way to become a stronger but still generous. Mm-hmm. If we can find that, the change will occur easily and as a natural flow. So we think that the change comes along in an easy way when our construct system allows for it, because our constructs are avenues for movement. So if the constructs are not crossed, movement goes smoothly, and we only have to accompany this process. But for that, she needs to somehow untangle or resolve this dilemma in one way or another. Okay, so the basic philosophy that we have in working with internal conflict dilemmas is that we have two forces, like in the systemic, going back to the initial comment by Harry, would be the homeostatic and the morphogenesis tensions in a system, right? In systems have some homeostatic forces that defend, that protect the status quo. Because as Kelly said, if we get rid of the status quo, if we get rid of all the homeostatic movements, then we have no schemas, no instruments to predict the upcoming second. So there is no continuity. There is no psychological continuity. So there is a need for continuity that psychology, and especially CBT, has mostly ignored. So we have a tension in all our consultation and change processes between the need for change. If it wouldn't exist, then it wouldn't exist the consultation or the therapy. But there is also a need for continuity. And this need for continuity has been turned also by coherence therapy as the pro-symptom positions. The important reasons why the symptom of the problem is needed for some reasons. The symptom is needed, and probably are reasons to protect the continuity of the system, are as part of the homeostasis, as systemic therapists we would say. So I see there is a common way of working between systemic and personal construct therapists in respecting, legitimating, and harmonizing both parts, not just pushing for change. I mean, I don't easily see a personal construct therapist as someone who is only pushing for change. I can see CBT therapists in that approach, and behavior therapists. But I think that one way to see what is core to our approach in helping people is respecting all the parts of our consultants, not only the parts that want to go along with change and are aligned with the supposed and desirable changes that they need, apparently. Okay, so this is more or less the theoretical approach that in which I am working currently, both in practice and research. Should I stop here just for you to make any comment or suggestion before I will review very briefly some of the papers that we did and respect, and then see the technological way that we approach it. So shall I stop sharing for a second and let you guys comment on that, or agree or disagree, or whatever it's fine with you as the general approach?
Any comments from anyone or questions?
I've got a comment. I'm just really pleased to see this, Guillem, because this is an issue that comes up time and time again when working with children with neurodiversities who are being forced to be more appropriate socially, but who instantly feel that their self is threatened. And it's something that is a real block for children and forces them to struggle in things like social skills groups because their very self is under threat. I'm really pleased to hear you talking about this. Thank you.
I'm very pleased for your comment. Okay, I interpret the silence as something like nothing new. We knew that already. I mean, it's consistent with PCP. We are in all along the lines. No big disagreements about it. Nothing, because it's nothing particularly new. I learned this basically from systemic and PCT approaches. So it's our common ground. This is my construction of the situation. Okay, so let me continue and let's see. I hope you are seeing now the screen. And okay, this is one of our studies, maybe the bigger one with depression, in which we compare a sample of 161 patients with a diagnosis of major depression or dysthymia. At the moment, it was the right word to use. Now DSM has changed, and we found that people with depression had nearly 70% of them had at least one implicative dilemma, while people in the control group, the proportion was about a third. So it was a significant difference, and it was recognized by publication in also an important journal. We had conducted a series of studies of different conditions, clinical conditions, and we did a meta-analysis and found that this presence and number of dilemmas was consistent across different cognitions. And we can see here, you can see here a list of percentages of the presence of at least one implicative dilemmas. This was our first study, which was poorly controlled, the clinical sample. It was not very well conducted study. This is the one I am mentioning now. And this is a specific one on dysthymia, bulimic, fibromyalgia, anxiety, social phobia, somatization. And the range for the non-clinical samples that we studied is much lower and usually significant when paired to a clinical sample. Well, recently we returned to the idea of studying psychosis, which is an old idea in PCP. And my view of psychosis was greatly influenced by a visit I did to Harry Proctor when he was a practicing principal psychologist at Somerset, and he was working with people with schizophrenia. And we had a lot of discussions, and that helped me to understand a little bit of what his perception of what people with schizophrenia was going through. And but this was not being developed as a research project until Elena arrived to our team. She was in Edinburgh as well, Elena Garcia Mieres. She conducted with us a first systematic review that you can find at Psychology and Psychotherapy. I'm sorry, it's not here. The Clinical Psychology and Psychotherapy, it's not here, the journal, I'm sorry. And then she published her results with 85 people with psychosis in a Schizophrenia Bulletin, which is, I think, a very significant journal in this area, and found that some of the measures of the repertory grid had an influence on positive as different to negative symptoms. For example, polarized scores had more to do with positive symptoms than other measures. Well, you can look at it. I don't want to be very extensive on this. And also she looked at gender difference. It was astonishing that women with psychosis had almost a double number of constructs with the same type of interview. So the cognitive richness of women was doubling the cognitive richness of men with psychosis. So this was very surprising to us. And it was Elena conducting all the interviews. And she reassured me, and I believe her, that she did use the same method all the time. Okay, it's the same type of interview. So she was not like favoring women in any way. But the difference was quite remarkable. Okay, so in this paper, we compare the people with psychosis with those with depression, and we found that self-discrepancies were higher in both areas and were associated to depressive mood. So people with psychosis and depressive mood were the most responsible for these measures. And interpersonal dichotomous thinking, let's say polarization in the scores, was more prevalent in women in both clinical groups, both in depression and psychosis. And also women with psychosis showed a higher ideal others discrepancy and had a more complex structure of personal identity than their male counterparts. Well, I just highlighted a few findings of the research, but I really recommend you to go to the papers. I just focused a little bit on this one because it compares two different samples of our study. But later, in our latest, these last 2 years, we were able to publish on gastrointestinal disorders and also on depression in adolescents in our beloved Journal of Constructivist Psychology. we are conducting, here's the study protocol, we are conducting a study of cognitive conflicts in borderline personality disorder, which is now coming to its end. We hope to finish the study in 2022. And we just finished our study with the treatment of fibromyalgia, comparing personal construct therapy with CBT in the treatment of women with fibromyalgia who had high levels of depression. The study protocol is already published, but we just learned yesterday that the paper with the results is accepted for publication, and it will be published in the International Journal of Clinical and Health Psychology. And also, we saw that in this paper in psychotherapy, this is in psychotherapy research with our collaborator Clara Plath, we found that there is a correlation between a successful psychotherapy and a psychotherapy that reduces cognitive conflict in the patients. So the two variables are associated. The pity part of it is that it happened in both CBT and personal construct therapy. So I'm sorry, but this is how research develops sometimes. Okay, we also developed an intervention manual for working with dilemmas, which you can find open access by free in BMC Psychiatry. I must confess that for me, it was a way of challenging a little bit the system to publish a psychological intervention based on personal construct therapy for working with unipolar depression in a psychiatry journal with no reference to medication at all. For me, it was not easy, but we finally could do it in BMC Psychiatry. It's I think it's a 60-page paper. It's a very, very long paper. It's a treatment manual. So it's a very long paper, and it's open access. Thanks to a funding that we had, we could pay for it to be open access. So you can get it, and you might agree or disagree with the procedures, but we use laddering, we use, of course, the grid to identify dilemmas, and we use ABC, ABC. We use many of the personal construct set of techniques for working with dilemmas. And we have a version in Spanish, which is in a book form, a traditional paper book, a book in paper, right? So we have like the two possibilities. Okay. And also, here are a couple of studies in depression and anxiety. Is the first study in which we studied the efficacy of our intervention manual for working with people with depression. So we did a randomized clinical trial, and the results at the 3-month follow-up are presented in depression and anxiety. And unfortunately, we did not find any difference between CBT and our approach focusing on dilemmas. Not also, neither at the follow-up, at 1-year follow-up, which is published in PLOS ONE. But, well, at least we can suggest that personal construct therapy focused on dilemmas is an alternative with some evidence, at least at the level of CBT, for working with people with depression. It's not our best expected result, but it's something to contribute to the community. So something more of evidence for those who are focused or obsessed by that. Okay, it's not particularly our case, but we have to work within the system, the university system and the funding system. So we conducted these randomized clinical trials. Okay, so the grid is marvelous. It can give us many solutions. It can provide us with many clinical insights. it can help us with practice, with clinical practice, but there are some difficulties or pitfalls or barriers. It's the term commonly used now. You need some training, which we try to provide in the course that Harry mentioned, but still we provide training to a very, very small proportion of practicing psychologists and psychiatrists in Spain, and also in Barcelona. It's a small proportion. So many people won't have access to a good repertory grid use. And if they try to do it just by reading, we don't know what can happen. Then you need to take the time to search for a computer system for data analysis, and then to have the knowledge to interpret the data output, which includes time to enter the data, time to work with the outputs, and also the results that you get. I do not recommend to share with the client unless you convert your consultation or therapy into a completely intellectual venture, which might be good for a very few cases. But my experience in therapy is that therapy must be a discovery process, mostly an emotional process, and showing data and graphics of certain type. It's more appealing for the cortex than for the limbic system, which is where change needs to occur, right? So this is another difficulty with the grid technique. And this might be an explanation of why not many people widely is using the repertory grid, and by implication, using personal construct therapy. Because I think the grid is the entry for people who look for methodologies to study identity and the individual, and then they discover the theory behind it. Maybe for some people it's the opposite. It was I went through the theory, but I think it's also a way to become familiar with constructivist and personal construct approaches. So what do we do? Because I think these are some of the reasons why our movement is still, a kind of family movement in which the size of the movement allow us to work as a big family, a big friendly and caring family, but not coming to the thousands and thousands and thousands of practitioners that are working out there. Okay, so we created EYME, Explore Your Meanings. What is EYME? It's an immersive digital platform to enhance the success of psychotherapeutic work or other types of consultations. So what are the components? We have this interview. As you see, we don't talk about elements and constructs. We use plain language. And we talk about people's perceptions, because this language we wrote it carefully with the idea of making it a language that is not a PCP jargon, but ready for understanding for everybody who is close to the field in some way. Okay. So now I need help. I need a volunteer, so I can show how EYME works, how EYME conducts the interview. I need a volunteer for that, and as soon as we have the volunteer, I will ask Harry to stop sharing, because I understand that some personal material will appear, and I think that we must protect intimacy, and also some of the company it's not very pleased with the idea of showing all the ingredients of EYME. I must say that we created EYME thanks to what is called technology transference kind of process. I mean, we usually consider universities as a place where teaching happens, as a place where research happens, but also it happens, there is an additional process that should happen, which is technology transfer. And technology transfer is the possibility to attract investors into projects created by researchers in a joint venture. So we created a company which is a spin-off of the Universitat de Barcelona. So it's partially owned by the university. I am also, as a researcher, I have a little share, and there is an investor who has a major part of it, who believed that our project was an interesting project and was ready to put all the money that was requested to construct this platform. So it's a venture, a joint venture between a private development and a public university, because my university is a public university. So let's see. Yes, let's see if we have a volunteer that would like to
I'd like to be a guinea pig.
Sorry?
I was asking if anyone would like to be a guinea pig, a victim of Guillem's research.
Guillem, I said I would if there was a deafening silence. So if you want me to, I will.
Okay.
That's
well,
very generous, Andy.
yes.
Tell me when to pause it then, Guillem.
Yes, yes, I feel more comfortable that way.
You want me to pause now?
Yes, please. Okay. So I am open to questions or... Uh-oh. Sorry.
Mika.
Yes, I think this is something that I've waited for several years. Thank you.
Mika, your sound is distorted.
Yeah, I finished it. Sorry. It was the YouTube that was moving on.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
better. Yes. I just say thank you. This is something I have waited for several years. So now you have actually made a good interface and also a very kind of accessible way of analyzing the results. So I'm really impressed.
Mm. I agree.
Thank you, Michael. Okay.
Yeah, can you, when you're in the VR situation, are you able to move the dots around so that you can change the configuration to a more ideal configuration or the one that you're looking for in the future?
No, you can only move the point of view of or the position from where you are immersed there, from where you are looking at it.
Right.
So you can go to the top of one element or another element and have a view from there, but the structure of meanings remains fixed.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I shall try to say something, but I warn you, I'm in a hotel room above a bar which is playing Bob Marley music very loudly, which you might be able to hear. A couple of weeks ago, I was fortunate enough to experience this, the virtual reality, and just wanted to say what an incredibly powerful experience it was. And I've looked at graphs and computer output of grids that I've done on myself many times in the past, but this managed to get to areas where those those things couldn't reach previously, and I found it a very emotional and a very insightful experience, getting to aspects of construing at low levels of awareness. So just wanted to thank you for that, Guillem, and I'm still processing that experience of 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Wow. Thank you, David.
Particularly powerful is when you can look at the grid from a different points of view. That's amazing. Look at the interpersonal space.
Yes, but this, what David just said, is important in terms of memory and retrieval of the information. So when we have a conversation and we say things to the patient, or the patient says things, what happens after 1 hour when she or he is out in the road, in the street, or after 1 week, or after, you know, the day after, it's half of the session is lost. Maybe it's somewhere in the unconscious mind, right, Harry? But not. And by contrast, having an immersive experience about your constructs and your elements has a tremendous impact on the memory that you will have of the session. And we checked that out several times, and I'm glad David came up and said that, because I think it was not 2 weeks ago. It was probably more than 1 month ago, or about a month ago, so 3 or 4 weeks. But the memory is still
right.
The memory is still alive because it was an experience. It was not a discourse or a narrative. It was something lived. That makes the repertory grid much less intellectual as it used to be.
Very interesting.
Guillem, well done, all the work for everybody involved. What's your hopes and dreams for this? What's your vision of what you'd like to see? What you know, picture 5 years, what's going to happen, or what do you want to happen?
Well, first, for the next year, we would like to have it completely tested in English. It's beginning to be distributed, commercialized in Barcelona area, and we are having good feedback from our customers or the psychologists working with it. We would like it to be widely spread across many different countries and used. And that it's very interesting that what happened is that people was interested by the VR thing, but later they become interested on what is a construct system and how did I construct my system. And I want to learn more about personal construct theory. I want to know more about what is a core construct. And now people is registering for a course which is based on EYME, but it's a middle-size course between a full training program in constructivist approaches, constructivist and systemic approaches, which is the course that it's a 3-year course that we have in Barcelona, in which Harry and David and others came to teach. It's much shorter, but it's more extensive than the basic training that is given with the product, with the platform access. So what is happening is that I am training now, and other people in my team are training psychoanalysts and humanist psychologists, and people from different orientations are beginning to be in touch with personal construct theory, but because of the attraction of virtual reality. And then after that, they come into the constructs and then realize that, wow, the interview was something powerful. I mean, it's not the 3D screen, It's not the navigation in the 3D. It's not the virtual reality. The interview was much interesting. But if we sell the interview, we try to distribute the grid without with the paper and pencil usual way. Well, we did so for decades, and so we can still do that. But now we have the option to get into the people who gets attracted by the virtual reality and are attracted by the new technologies, and especially for young people, I think. I had a few experiences in which they were illuminated, but I don't think because of the technology. It's because the conversation that was going on was a psychological, a meaningful conversation, not because of the technology, and they were used to be treated like, let's look at your symptoms. How are you doing today? Are you taking the pills? So this is the kind of conversation that they are used to. And now they were talking about many different stuff. So in fact, it's nothing new. I mean, it's the therapy, the kind of therapy we all of us like doing about meanings, construing people and all that. But the way of entering that is through the technology. And this allows us to do what we really would like to do, which is working with meanings, changing constructs, and making lives more successful along these lines.
Completely agree. It's a very impressive tool. It looks excellent. And I think in a funny way, it seems to me that the technology actually is foregrounding all those things you've just said. And particularly to people who are probably much younger than I am, whom virtual reality, immersive technology is kind of part of their normal landscape, which it wasn't for me for a long time. I think they'll almost kind of take that for granted. So what's really rich in this is the psychological conversation you can have. I see fantastic potential for this in therapy, and that being very conversational, again, right down, young people with different cognitive abilities, because you can talk about the distance between things, the size between things. Oh, look, they seem to be a long way over there. I wonder why that is. What's that about for you? So it seems like a fantastic jumping off point for all those kind of therapeutic conversations. It's really impressive.
Guillem,
Thank you.
Have you had any contact with Ezekiel Di Paolo and the inactivism at all? And I'm thinking particularly in terms of their construct of languaging.
Very, very small contact. I found it intriguing, but hard to understand for my capacities. Maybe I should dedicate more time. But
I'm just intrigued because what you've got there with your VR is effectively an inactive system of construing, which is embodied as well, and therefore inactive, but because it has the languaging and it has an element of autonomy in it, which you wouldn't get just working with 2D grids. And I'm just sitting here thinking, my goodness, you've developed a VR system that puts something that used to be quite abstract for people into an inactive format, which from my point of view is making me hop up and down with excitement. And I'm just wondering if this is not a conversation that would be very useful. Ezekiel's going to be talking on here, I think February, is it, Harry?
Something like that, yeah.
And he's going to be talking about something participatory sense making, which languaging is part of it. And this just sounds like you two ought to be having conversations. You really do.
Can I ask you, people know that I'm interested in the relational aspects of things. And many years ago, Tony Ryle, Mikhail will remember, I think he might have gone actually, but he was able to do the DYAD grid, in which you could get the distances between people coming out in space. And I was wondering if there was a possibility of adapting the system to include relationships between all the people in the person's world, and maybe plotting it on certain dimensions such as close, distant, dominant, submissive, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Could be
and I remember that the DYAD grid, sorry, had another difference, not only about the elements, which were relationships, but about the constructs, which were verbs, actions,
Yes.
or feelings, or like loving, or which could be also dispositional
It's,
construct,
sort
like
of directional, wasn't it?
directional, exactly.
Feels,
Yeah, I
towards
think
that person.
I think we could be adapted for that. But the issue, Harry, would be, do you think that would be useful for your therapy? I mean, what would you do when the person is in that immersion? Because here we have oneself at one place.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there is me with my mother with me, or and me with my partner with me. It's like so we
when
would
you when you think of a live family therapy session, everybody's experiencing the ongoing interactions and relationships between the whole group, and you know, the person's reaction over there to this discussion and all that sort of thing. And it would be amazing if you could somehow represent that in virtual space. It's a
I never thought of doing it with the DYAD Grid. I need to think it, but if we do it, we want to do it for a specific clinical purpose, because we want to. I haven't thought of it. I really appreciate your idea, Harry. We will consider.
You were putting was to say, right, now we've got this nice 3D thing, and being able to move around it and to say, oh, what's it like from this point of view? That is so powerful.
Yeah. Thank you for the idea. Okay.
Any other points or questions from anyone?
Yeah, I would. So I have a simple-minded idea, but what I would like to have happen is I do that, and I would feel better about myself. I would somehow I would move in the direction of where I want to be and feeling. And I wonder, is that really working? Can you work with that so the person leaves the thing with, I feel better about myself?
Yeah, I think there is an increase in clarity and also in self-knowledge. I think I was working with a psychoanalyst last week, and he said, well, this is what Sigmund Freud all the time wanted, to gain insight. This is just a technology for the insight. This is what the psychoanalyst said. So maybe after the insight, you don't feel better. Maybe you feel confronted with your own construing, and maybe you see more clear some of your difficulties, or more clear some of the traces of the history which are packed in your construct system. And maybe it's not a direct road to increase a well-being or feeling better. It's not a type of like a pill that makes you feel better, right? But it really increases self-knowledge, and I think that and also not only who I am, but what can I become, and what are my possibilities, and what are the pitfalls or the difficulties in my road to change.
I think we said that the task of psychotherapy is to get things moving again. I think greater self-awareness of what the dimensions are and how they're connected, and where what, to use a psychoanalytic term, where the resistances might be. But that's another. It seems to me that I'm really impressed with trace the history of implicative dilemmas in different terms from different psychotherapy systems, can't you? So in psychoanalysis, you might call it resistances. Why are people not doing things which want to do and which would make them feel better. It's because they're embedded in things which might be worse, but they're not aware of the connection. There's a low level of awareness, or it's unconscious. So again, all of this, I think, really is amazingly powerful potential to play with those ideas and get people moving again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
Just a thought on I guess Gerald's question, going back to that, and I guess perhaps David's reaction to doing this. I wonder if people actually feel, if they engage with it well and the kind of plot, whether they feel understood in a way that maybe they haven't been before. Not only you're talking about their self-awareness, but they are sharing that with someone, aren't they, to some extent? So I wonder if they feel that. I also have a couple of questions. One is a quite specific one, going right back earlier in your talk. You were saying, sadly, you didn't get a better outcome from PCP than from CBT. I just wondered, was there any difference in the dropout rate?
Yes, but not significant, not statistically significant.
Right. Okay. And I suppose the other question I had, oh, hang on, I've done the wrong thing. I was trying to switch off my lower hand thingy. Yeah, well, that's good as well. The other thing, and forgive me on this if I should know it, is using a grid to start off and then looking at the statistical analysis, either in this way or the old-fashioned way, the only way that you think you can pick up implicative dilemmas, or is it a more efficient way, or do you have a comment on that?
Oh, yes. Well, I think that implicative dilemmas is a way to tap internal conflict.
Yes.
And internal conflict, you can see it in, I mean, self-harm, you know, is one hand in conflict with the other. I mean, many clinical symptoms are expressions, direct expressions of conflict. And in a therapeutic conversation, often you can find conflicts expressed in a narrative way. But yeah, implicative dilemmas are not that often expressed naturally in a narrative way. They are quite implicit.
Right. So you don't think you get at them by discussing, say, the implications of a certain change? They don't tend to emerge, you think?
Well, I think that ABC technique is tapping on that. Yeah. But you need to select the right constructs at the right moment for that.
Right.
And
whereas your grid
facilitated
kind of pulls them out. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, our intervention for working with dilemmas uses ABC, uses laddering about the discrepant constructs, uses the techniques that I learned from you in the PCP community.
Okay, thank you.
Well, maybe we should bring it to a close, Guillem. I think you said you were going to do a 90-minute session, and you've very generously given us a 110-minute session.
Yeah.
So, I'd like to thank you on behalf of everybody so much for an incredibly stimulating presentation. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It has been really a pleasure to have such a nice audience and such a warming and participating, and you really encouraged me to keep on going. And I because you are authorized, you are authorities on this. So your support, it's much more valuable than anybody else, because you are real experts on what we are talking about. There is no other audience like you. I mean, nobody has our common ground as you do. So for me, presenting this was quite and had a lot of implications, because you are fully knowledgeable of all the basis, all the ground, the background which is behind this. So if you don't like it, it will be a massive invalidation for me. Thank you.
And I
Now
just
it's massive validation.
Could I thank Sandy as well for
Yes, Sandy.
for doing the
Thank you.
example. Brilliant. Well, goodbye, everybody. Let's stop and hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. No, not 2 weeks' time. It's in January, isn't it? And it's going to be Bob Niemeyer on grief. So that'll be an excellent session. So have a happy Christmas, everybody.
Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guillem.
Thank you for
everyone.
being here.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Bye.
Christmas.
And thank you, Sandy.
All right.
Yes, thank you.